For many people, saving for retirement and living in retirement means hoping that the money lasts. Their goal is not to outlive their money, but for others, building a legacy to pass on is what's important. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talk with certified financial planner Chad Taylor on how to create a family wealth legacy to pass on to the next generation. My guest today is Chad Taylor, a certified financial planner and the founder of Sea Point Wealth Advisors, a boutique independent wealth management firm based in San Diego. He began his financial services career in 1997 after earning a degree in finance from Texas State University and has spent over 2 decades helping high net worth families and small business owners build and protect their wealth. Before launching Sea Point in 2021, Chad served as Senior Vice President of Wealth Management at UBS Financial Services, where he guided clients through some of the most challenging market cycles of the modern era. Chad holds a personalized financial planning degree from San Diego State University. And as I said, he's a certified financial planner and has that designation, which he's held since 2006. He works with successful families and business owners who make good money but want to make sure they're doing the right things with it. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. Nice meeting you.
So we're going to talk about before we hit record. I say a lot of people uh, are worried about if they have enough money, are they going to outlive their money? Some people have a wonderful problem, which is having more money than they could possibly spend or really want to spend. And for them, maybe legacy is important to them and passing on this money. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So if people have that interest, hey, I want to pass something on to my children. So let's get some ideas on what to do. Now, when most people think about legacy, they think about estate planning after they're gone. They go and then their heirs figure it out. But you, as I understand, approach it differently. Where does legacy planning actually start?
Yeah, I think, when you think about legacy planning, that starts when you're living, right? So estate
Yes.
planning is documents that happen when you pass, and it's the documents help transfer the money, but the legacy is the intent. It's, what is your plan for the money? Is it to take care of your kids? Is it to take care of charities? It's the conversations you have about, what you want your legacy to be after you pass on. So I think of like estate planning is like the documents, right? It's the paperwork that is involved, the legal side of it. But the legacy planning is the leadership. It's the leadership on here's what I want my stuff to be for me when I pass on in the direction I want it to go. And so that's for me when I think of legacy planning. It's the stuff we do while we're living to get ready for the estate planning.
Mhm. And so you start thinking about this, not just am I what's my number,
Right.
which I've talked about on other shows. What's your number? What do you need to get? What do you and which is often driven by what you want to do in retirement. Do
Yeah.
you just want to, relax and play golf? Do you want to travel? Who knows? And maybe there's a second career, a second life with a business. Who knows?
Yeah.
But they want to know what that number is. But if they identify legacy as being part of that plan, then you're really thinking about an even higher number, right? And sort of punching up a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on, what they're trying to accomplish, right? I mean, for the most part, legacy is a higher number when you're talking about charitable foundations and trying to accomplish a legacy for maybe your kids to kind of inherit and create your legacy going forward, right? Do they manage the charitable foundation for you? So I kind of start with like the legacy planning is the why, right? What's your why? What are you trying to build? What are you trying to prevent for your kids? You're trying to prevent your kids from wasting all your money. Are you trying to help your kids, build on their legacy, to generational wealth. But when you think about the number, everybody's got their own different number of what a legacy is too.
Mhm.
For some clients, that's a $10 million number, and they want to make sure their kids are taken care of. maybe with a portion of it, but the other portion is I really want to give money to charity, right? Well, that $10 million is a good legacy to start that. And then when you get up into the, the 30, 40, $50 million, now you're talking about where you have to worry about, how do I manage the estate taxes with that legacy too, right? So it's just more on what the goal is and what your why is to kind of build out that legacy planning.
Hmm. But it's also a mindset. I mean,
Yeah,
you're not what you're thinking about legacy in general. You have a mindset of I want there to be something left over, and I think that's the first step is forming that mindset
right.
that I want. So that's your goal. You want something to be left over to pass on to either your heirs or charity or whatever it is, whatever your legacy looks like. So I guess what I'm questioning is where does that legacy planning actually start? If you have that mindset, that's your goal.
Yep.
Whether it's and naturally what you determine that legacy to be, which is step two, is then
Yep.
going to drive the next thing, which is how much more do I need than my retirement number?
Yeah, so we had it's funny. So now I understand what you're asking there. We actually do that in the retirement planning conversation, right?
Hmm.
So when we start looking at the retirement plan and what the assets are and what you're trying to accomplish with that retirement plan, we look at the number, right? How much can you spend for what amount of liquid assets you have available to you? And so when we build that plan, it's like, is your goal to spend everything and spend this down to zero upon your death, or is your plan to build a legacy for the kids? And so when you build out that financial plan, you kind of create a legacy bucket with those assets. Like, we're going to kind of spend this amount, and this is what we need to live on, for our lifetime. But this bucket here is designed for our legacy for the kids and for charity. And so that really starts, when you start building in the financial plan. And it can be, obviously during retirement or even pre-retirement when you're trying to determine what your income needs are. When I want to retire, I need X amount of dollars to live off of. I need X amount of assets to produce X amount of dollars. And then I have this leftover amount that is, what do I do with because we're not going to spend it all.
Right.
That's when you create your why and what you're trying to do accomplish with your legacy. Does
Hmm.
that
So
make
I
sense?
guess it's sort of there's more than one bucket. There's
Yeah,
the money, there's your retirement bucket, and there's your legacy bucket.
correct. Yep.
And I guess my next question is, where we're starting, but what the first steps look like. I guess that you've kind of described those first steps and having like I said, the retirement bucket and the legacy bucket, and filling up one, and then when you're satisfied that you filled that, then you start filling the legacy bucket.
Yeah,
Now you've worked with a lot of high net worth families, uh, well, let me get to an earlier question. Uh, one of the most common ways that families accidentally destroy wealth between generations, even when the first generation did everything right. So, sort of like inversion thinking. Not only do I have to do to pass on a legacy, but inverting that and asking myself, what should I avoid doing? What mistakes should I avoid to prevent from screwing everything up?
yeah. It's not having the conversation with your kids, right? Or with like talking to your kids or family members about what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
And so without that communication, they don't have the clear knowledge on what you want to do with your legacy. Then when they inherit that money, they might not necessarily be following what your goals is for your legacy, right? And so having that communication with your kids, your family members, your attorney to make sure this is all set up properly to begin with. If it's not done and confusion comes into place, that's when you have problems with, I think, legacy, where you have problems with, potentially destroying the wealth between generations. And so I think the first step is just the communication, being clear and open with what you're trying to accomplish and talking to your kids about that.
Mm-hmm. And there's I did an episode, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to it, but uh, about how from the children's perspective, how they handle inherited wealth.
Right.
And some of the things he talked about was, and it's the way you raise your kids. Uh,
Yep.
I'm sure you've heard of the book The Millionaire Next Door, and
Oh, yeah.
one of the observations that those authors make is that 7 out of 10 American millionaires are first generation. So 70% of millionaires do not successfully pass on their legacy to the next generation.
Yeah.
Uh, and part of it is removing any kind of dependency during the parent's life. We just say
Yep.
that they call it economic outpatient care, where they say, "Well, I want my kids to have better than I did, so here's a down payment for a house. Here, let me, get you a nice car," things like that. So, and they don't get them to be financially independent or have the right financial mindset. It's teaching what they've known and passing on that knowledge and that wisdom, not just the money to the next generation, right?
Yeah, and I think, when I talk to my clients who have legacies that they're worried about passing on to their kids, I think the biggest concern is how do the kids react when they inherit that money?
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to, because what's the old saying, more money, more problems, right?
Yeah.
And so you got these kids who have grown up, you know, with wealth and sometimes never really had to, life's been easy for them, right? So now you're introducing money to them that they've inherited, and you might be introducing a different struggle to them that, they're not ready to handle. And so it comes back to having conversations with your kids, being clear on what the goals are, but you've got to teach those kids from early on, the value of money and, what it's like to work for your money, right? And the value of money. And so that way, when you pass on this legacy to these kids, they're prepared for it, because um, we've all seen the stories of wealthy families passing on wealth to the next generation that doesn't go well, and the kids struggle with, drugs and alcohol problems, and the money doesn't last past one generation. And so, I think, as you're looking at it, and like I said, I'm thinking of my conversation with my clients, that's probably the number one issue they have is they worry about what's going to happen to the kids when they inherit this money. And so you've got to have a game plan on how to handle that and talk to your kids and prepare them for what they're inheriting.
Mm-hmm. And part of one of the things that this guest pointed out on the show is that it's an identity issue with the children that how do they, what is their self identity? What
Right.
is their self image? And do they see themselves as trust fund babies, or do
Yep.
they see themselves as successful professionals? Or they've started a business, they've got their own jobs, that they've defined themselves beyond their inherited wealth, and that so they're not trying to live out the life of a trust fund baby,
Right.
and in that way blow through the money.
Yeah.
But they have their own identity. They don't see themselves as trust fund babies. They see themselves, on their own 2 feet, and that's a lot of it is just parenting, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think of a couple of clients I have who are business owners where the kids will take over the next generation of the business. But they didn't entitle them that business. They actually made them go out, work outside the business first, earn some, self-worth by having a job on their own, having to work with a boss that's not their parents, and to learn how to navigate life, right? And then as they've gotten older, they brought them back into the business when they've got a little experience and, like you said, little self-worth from accomplishing something on their own
Mm-hmm.
versus, well, look, my dad's got this business. I'm just going to walk in and take it over and inherit it, and I can do what I want to do, right? But they've made them go outside the business and get some life experience before they come back into the family business.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting too from the perspective of, like I said, the business owner, and that and the inverse is true. You look at it, what you described is that is children that want to carry on the family business after the parents die, and
Right.
they get the experience outside. Then they come in, and they're more likely to not run that business into the ground.
Right.
But then the question becomes, what if the kids don't want to do that? What if they have identified themselves on their own 2 feet as something completely different from
Yeah.
what their parents did and what their business does? How does that legacy change when, as far as the business is concerned, when it's not being passed on to the children?
Well, that's another problem coming up too, is a lot of these kids don't want to work in the family business, which, I've had one client with a successful business where the kids don't want to be involved in the family business that I can thinking about. And that changes things for the client, right? Because their original intent was to pass it on to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as the kids got older, they had zero interest in running the family business.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, as the owner of the business, the parent is thinking about, well, what do I do with this business? How do I get rid of it? I've worked my whole entire life to build up this business and build my family, net worth and estate from this business, and it been a great business for us. But now I got to find somebody to come in and take it over that's going to care about it as much as I did to take, which I really built up for the family, and the kids don't want to be involved in it. And so that's a, kind of a different story when now you have to look at, taking this to the market, selling it, look at valuations, is it a business I can go out and sell, or is it more of like the business owner is the key employee, and when he's gone, the business isn't worth anything, which is what hopefully the kids were going to, step in that role. But then now you've got a situation where you're potentially selling a business,
Hmm.
inheriting the assets, or no, sorry, getting the assets from selling the business. Now you've got a net worth that might have estate issues, and now we've got kids that aren't inheriting it. Now we got to transfer the money to the kids down the road potentially. And how is that? The same kind of thing, though. You're versus inheriting the business. Now they're inheriting the money from it, which, did they get that self-worth we talked about from working outside the family business and, identifying something that's not a trust fund kid when they inherit those assets. So it's the same problem, just different way about it.
Hmm. It's a different type of legacy. It's not the intangible of the business that they're passing on. It's the
It's a
money
liquid.
from the sale of
Right.
the business. Either now they may not die with their boots on. So if it might be sale of the business upon their death. They were running it until they died. They never retired, or they sold their business and moved to Florida or whatever,
Yeah.
and that money is then. Uh, is there any advice if that's going to be if that business was something that you're going to pass on to your children as legacy, but they don't want it, and you then sell it in your lifetime? Does that go into the legacy bucket? Does it go into your bucket? Do you split it? And what are the differences in how you deal with that as far as the financial planning is concerned?
Yeah, but that goes back to, so that point, the asset is no longer a legacy asset going to the family. It's now an asset that is for me as the owner, right?
Hmm.
And so now when I'm building that financial plan, I've got to look at it and say, okay, now as building the financial plan, we have an asset that is either going to be sold or you're going to work till you die with your boots on, like you said, right? Well, if you're working with, and you plan on just working until you just can't work in the business anymore, you've got income coming in, right?
Hmm.
So you don't need to draw income from your portfolio.
Hmm.
So you still have the same problem. Now you got assets that are growing because you're not spending them down in retirement. So those assets are growing, which is still building a legacy bucket for the kids.
Hmm.
Okay. So it's still the same issue. It's just different categories of where the asset is, right? Now, if they sell that business, and sell the business and it becomes a liquid assets that's now part of my portfolio. Now I gotta look and say, okay, I've sold this business for X amount of dollars. It'll produce X amount of income for me for the rest of my life. Am I still growing that legacy? Do I have enough to, to give myself income during that time period? Now what's left over? And what are we gonna do with that money that's left over? That's the conversation that goes back to the kids. Is like, here's my, I've now satisfied my income during retirement by selling this business. I can live how I want to. I can take care of myself. I can meet all my income needs. And now I've got, X amount of dollars growing that I'll never touch. That is now a legacy asset for the kids. So it just kind of transfers from, the business being an illiquid asset that's generating income to a business that's now become a liquid asset that I'm now living off of, but I'm still creating that bucket for the kids down the road. So
Hmm.
it all comes down to the financial plan and how you kind of separate the assets and generate income from those assets and where's the income coming from.
Hmm. Or maybe the way you split the two buckets is that you take the sales proceeds from the business, net of taxes,
Yep.
and then put it into a tax-friendly investment that is income producing.
Yeah.
The asset sits in the legacy bucket while the income sits in the retirement bucket. And in that way, the legacy grows
Yep.
to some extent, that it isn't kicking off dividends or whatever
Yep.
payments into the retirement bucket, which is a nice way of achieving both goals.
Yeah, so you're just stripping the income out of that legacy bucket, right? So the only time that comes to be a problem is if that, like, say interest rates are down or you
Mm-hmm.
can't generate enough income out of that liquid asset to generate the lifestyle. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when that becomes an issue where you can't necessarily split it that way because, if we got an asset that's, I'm just throwing a number there, it's $10 million and rates are down, that's only producing, $200,000 a year to live off of, but I need $400,000 a year to live off of. Well, I can't just strip those dividends. I got to do something different with my plan to create that income need that I have.
Mm-hmm.
But if the asset's big enough, and you have a $10 million asset kicking out $200,000 of income, and I'm living off $100,000 of income, then you're fine. You can build that out and be okay. So it all comes down to the income needs of retirement and
Mhm.
how you can back into what needs to be in that bucket to produce that income, which tells you how much money you have for a legacy bucket.
Exactly. And if you have sold the business because you've retired,
Yeah,
then it really also comes down to, and what you factor in is the what you've done in retirement savings to produce a pension for yourself, to
right.
where and is that income stream enough to uh, sustain you,
Correct.
so that the money from the income off the sale of the business is sort of extra money for travel or whatever it is. You don't need to
Yep.
have a certain amount of income stream. You can still enjoy that income and preserve the asset as legacy.
Yeah, it just comes down to withdrawal rates, right? What's my
Mm,
withdrawal rate on the portfolio and how much gap do I have? How much room do I have?
exactly. Well, let's next talk about how the successful people do it. You work with high net worth families. What are the ones who successfully pass wealth on to the next generation do differently than the ones who are unsuccessful?
Well, it goes back to communication, I think. The ones who do it successfully, they have, family meetings, right? They talk to their kids about it. It's not something that kept to, close to their chest until they pass away, right? And the kids all of a sudden like, oh, I've got this now. What am I doing with it? So it's the communication between the family, or no, sorry, the parents and the kids, explaining, what they've set up, having those family meetings to talk about the assets, letting the kids know how much they have, how
Mm,
much they can expect to inherit, and then just laying out the framework of this is what I want my legacy to be. This is what we want to accomplish with these funds. But it's that clear communication channel. If you're not communicating to the kids, then they don't really have any idea what your goals are, right? And so they
mm,
can't successfully execute your legacy if they don't know what your legacy is. And
mm,
so you got to communicate with them. And the biggest thing I found is the family meetings.
mm,
Have these family meetings to talk about it. Sometimes we're involved in that. Other times, the clients will talk to us like, hey, we're gonna meet with our kids, give some things to talk about. And we'll go through talking points about, this is what we set up, this is why we set up things a certain way. If you want us to talk with you and your kids, we're happy to do that. If you want the kids to just reach out and talk to us about what it is and kind of have you guys out of the picture, we're happy to do that. And so it's just a communication between all parties to make sure things are being executed properly.
mm. And are there, you mentioned talking points, other than the ones you mentioned, are there, when you say, not obviously, there are certain specific issues with each person, each
Yep.
family, but in general, are there sort of overall ideas or things to communicate with them at these family meetings, and how often should they have them?
Yeah, there is, but it kind of depends on the age of the kids, right?
Yeah,
Um, I've got a client I'm thinking about right now who the kids are younger, so we're
right,
talking high school and college. Those conversations are different than my client in Nevada who's got kids that are in the 40, 50 range, right?
right.
And so, the ones that are the younger, you're kind of talking about them. What is wealth? What is your expectations when you inherit this money? What are your guiding principles of how you're going to react if you were to inherit this money at a young age? This is a charitable account we set up. So once we pass away, you two kids will be the in charge of this charitable account, and this is what we'd like to have it go towards. But because now you guys are in charge, what are some of the charities you'd like to be involved in? And maybe we can start those today, and you guys can kind of be involved at a younger age with donating to these charities or picking out charities and getting to do some community service that we think would be good for you because you're inheriting all this wealth that you're giving back to the community. And so that's with some of the younger kids. With the older kids, one of them, unfortunately, I'm thinking of a family where the kid is probably not responsible. He's got a little bit of drug issues and alcohol issues. And so in my conversation with that client, it's like, how do we handle this? And so in that situation, the daughter's fine. The son is, hopefully he gets out of the problem that he has, but we're setting up a professional trustee to manage it for the son. Right. And so it's the conversation with the son. Unfortunately, it's not a very pleasant conversation. I haven't been in that conversation, but the clients told me about it. where it's like, look, we just don't want to put you in a situation where you inherit all this money and all of a sudden you have access to all these funds and we've got drug issues that you have now access to go out and buy as much drugs as you want. So we're going to put a professional trustee on top of your inheritance, and your sister is going to inherit it and be free to do what she wants to with it. So that's a tougher conversation to have, obviously. And the frequency, for the most part, it's once a year. I'd say most of them do it once a year, unless there's something coming up with a charity event, right? There's a client just sold his business here recently, and we just set up a charitable thing for them. In the summer, there's a big charity event that they're doing, and so I know the family's gonna get together and talk about how they want to donate to it. And is it going to be just donation with cash? Are we going to volunteer? And so, it's that's kind of like a one-off because there's an event happening, right? So, but other than that, I think once a year is completely fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, and with when looking at the children passing on legacy, you have that child may not be good with money, may not be uh, have drug problems or whatever, debt problems. Where yeah, that's part of the estate planning. You
Yeah,
create either a revocable living trust and start it during your lifetime, or a pour over trust through your will
right,
that does some asset protection that creates a third party that is the gatekeeper for that money.
right.
And that unfortunately, if all else fails with these talks with the kids, that's one way of at least preserving that legacy.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned that too. I think of like some of the kids where the parents are worried about a divorce, right? So how do we
Yes,
protect the assets to where it goes to only my daughter and her kids, but if they separate, they don't go to the ex-spouse. And so that becomes part of the conversation when you're building out your legacy plan too, because divorce is a big record of wealth as well.
and I've talked to more than one estate planning attorney who has said that is a common concern
Yep.
of clients where they said that no good son-in-law, daughter-in-law, whatever, we don't want them to get their hands on it either because in the event of divorce or they'll spend it or whatever it is,
Yeah.
or the child where they're worried about that business they started going into bankruptcy
Yeah.
and they don't want them to lose their inheritance, lose that legacy
Right.
uh, to a creditor.
Yeah. Yep. So, that's all gets talked about, right? It's all part of the conversation and talking about it. And look, nobody wants to talk about divorce, right? But it's things
Right.
that happen. And so, when they're talking to their kids, they talk about it. It's like, this is not for your ex or your husband. If anything was happened to you with a divorce or you pass away early, we want it to go to the kids. And so nothing against him, but this is how we're going to plan for it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have that conversation early, so that way if ever it comes up, something happens, the daughter's not surprised about it, and there's no issues down the road, and that's become clear communication on how you want your things handled.
Exactly. So, next question is, and one part of an
Yeah.
estate planning puzzle, as you put it together, is life insurance.
Yep.
That can be a good thing. It could be a bad or unnecessary thing,
Yep.
especially as you get older, where you no longer need life insurance to replace income because you're now retired and you have these investments that have hopefully will produce income after your death. How does life insurance fit into a legacy strategy? When does
Yeah.
it make sense and when doesn't it?
Yeah. We used to like life insurance used to be a bigger tool with estate planning, several years ago. And the attorneys I've worked with now more recently, when we build out the estate plans, we don't use life insurance as much as we used to,
Mm,
which kind of surprises me. It's expensive, right, to buy life insurance and, setting up an irrevocable trust to take care of the estate taxes and make sure the money passes the kids properly so that the kids aren't paying estate taxes. But most of the attorneys I work with now, because what happens, we get ideas and we kind of talk about it, and then we go to the attorneys and then we craft strategies, right?
mm,
Most of them are doing the pour overs. So it's like, look, we're gonna with a new portability clause, and you can pass, I don't know, what is it, $30 million tax free now to the next generation
mm,
without paying estate taxes. And if you get an estate worth 40, $50 million, well, let's say it's $50 million, you get a $20 million tax bill that's going to cost you $10 million in taxes, right? And so what we've done is a lot of it is set up where that money might go to a charity. And the charity strips off that income for a period of time, and then after a period of years, that comes back to to the family. And so instead of using, there's a case we're just looking at here recently for maybe using some permanent insurance for the irrevocable life insurance trust. It was going to cost him 100, $120,000 a year. And the attorney we talked to is like, let's just do this charitable thing and then avoid paying the insurance. The kids are still inheriting, I think it was $10 million each because there's three kids, plus the inflation for assuming the estate tax stays where it is, right? It's always changing. But then, we can, put this money in charity and then it comes back to you over time and you benefit the charity and you avoid having to pay the life insurance fees. And so I think there's some more creative strategies now that the
Mm-hmm.
attorneys are using versus just doing the life insurance like we used to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let's say, what's the one thing that most people put off about legacy planning that if they did this week would give them the most peace of mind?
Yeah, it's probably, especially if the kids are young, is assigning the guardians, right? The beneficiaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you've got young kids, like I've got young kids, I got a 17, a 15, a 10, and a 7.
Mm-hmm.
And if something happened to both of us, if we didn't have our guardians in place, I mean that's a bad situation, right? And so I think for especially the young kids is just making sure your guardian is who's going to take care of your kids if something happens to you, right? And
Right.
so that peace of mind is huge, because we know if something happens to us, we know exactly where the kids are going and they're taken care of, and our assets go to help to that guardian that'll help fund the kids until they're of age. So as with young kids, I think that's the biggest one is guardianship. If you're older, I think the big one is, making sure you have your durable power of attorney in place, right? To where if healthcare directive. So, if something was to happen to you, your spouse can take care of you and have to not worry about, getting the hospital authorization to make decisions on your behalf. And so those are probably the two big ones I would say that, would I think would ease peace of mind if those were put in place. I think that would make you feel a little bit better.
Yeah, and not about money per se, but just that your children, your family will be okay.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I found one of the things that people don't really think about. They said, okay, I've got in my will, there's a guardian named. So if we're both gone, there'll be a guardian for the kids and money through the kids through a trust or whatever it is. But what happens if you're on vacation, you're driving down the road, and you get into an automobile accident? The kids are okay in the back seat, but you're both in the hospital. You'll get out eventually,
Well,
but who takes care of the kids in the meantime? You
right.
don't think about uh, guardianship in that context. You're still
Yeah.
around, but you're not able to take care of the kids for a few weeks.
Right. Yeah. And who's that person? And have you talked to that person and see if they're okay with it? You know, and so those things need to be put in place to make sure that, look, life happens, accidents happen,
Mhm.
and you got to be prepared. Like, it's sometimes morbid to think about, but you got to be prepared for those things because, God forbid something did happen like that. You're gonna feel a lot worse if your kids are suffering because you didn't take care of the stuff you need to take care of.
Right. So, we talked a lot about legacy, about just first of all mindset, and then figuring out what your legacy looks like, what you want to pass on, and a lot of that is financial, but also just parenting and communication
Yeah.
to create that, and of course the right estate planning documents. So, uh, what what do you do? In other words, if someone is listening to this podcast and said, "Boy, yeah, legacy is important to me, and I just want to make sure, my wife and I, my spouse and I, want to make sure that we pass something on to the kids, or have a legacy." A broader legacy through charity or setting up a foundation or
Yeah.
whatever form that legacy takes. How do you help folks like that, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's we do help people with those situations, and it starts with a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like again, it goes back to the why. What am I trying to accomplish? Why am I trying to accomplish this? And what are my, so I guess more of a why and a what is what are my goals with these assets? Because you built the assets, you've accumulated these assets. Now let's figure out what your goal is. And
Mhm.
so, we help kind of craft the strategy, through our back office. We have high net worth teams that have attorneys that are available that we can kind of talk to kind of form out the plan. And then we go talk to your attorney. We go talk to the estate plan attorney, and we all sit together and we kind of form out those goals. And so we kind of manage obviously the asset size of it. We're on the investment side, and we help with the strategy, and then we work with attorneys to craft the actual documents to execute those strategies. And so that is something we do, for almost all of our clients, because it's part of the overall financial picture, right? If those aren't in place or your house is in order, we're not doing our job, because those are things that are going to be problems down the road if we don't do our job properly. So we definitely do that. It's part of our points of service, essentially our scopes of service. And so, how do people get in touch with us? Our website is Sea Point Wealth Advisors, which is sea like the ocean, SEA Point Wealth Advisors. And I can be reached at chad@seapointwealth.com. And we're happy to have conversations with people who are struggling through this and talking through their situation and how we can maybe improve it for them.
Do you have any books or any informational resources that folks can take advantage of?
Yeah, we don't have any books. Obviously in our business, we're compliance takes a big a part of our stuff that we can do. But when we talk to people, we have attorneys that we talk to with our high net worth team that will they have a pamphlet, I guess is what you say, but it's more than a pamphlet. It's like a PowerPoint of like all these different options that are available that explains what they are and how they could affect your estate plan, which
Hmm.
is kind of like general overview, and it's compliance approved. It's been put out. So that's the stuff we share with people. But as far as the books, it's just too hard to get approved through compliance and regulations.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Chad. As I mentioned when we were discussing before I hit record, this is an unusual sort of a niche topic, but but it's a topic that people don't think about.
Yeah.
And maybe that niche would grow if people say, "Hey, I want to make sure I have a great retirement, but I want to leave a legacy either to my children or to society, to a particular cause. I want to be remembered and live on in spirit, as it were. And maybe that'll inspire some listeners to start thinking about legacy
Yeah, no, I
and
agree.
reach out to you."
I think, when we build out the financial plans and we're looking at this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have this much left. If things go as planned, I'm gonna have this much left when I pass on.
Mhm.
Well, that's your legacy planning right there. So, and then all of a sudden that's a different conversation, because now we got to think about what we're gonna do with these assets. And that's where we can help people, and hopefully help people on your podcast.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Chad.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.